All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Double M Radio Gamescast. As always, I'm your host Ryan, joined by my lovely duo of co-hosts, Brett
Hello.
and Wyatt.
We should all have our own little special dance when the intro song plays.
Why they
So,
can't
like,
see
all-
us.
all-
So there
all-
was going to be cameras this episode, but I did not know that we were only 3 people until right beforehand.
If you let me finish my sentence, I was going to say when we all have cams on, we all
do
need
it.
our own special little dance.
Yeah, we have our
okay? I
cams
think
on
it'd be
just
really
to
special.
ourselves. We'll get
Dance
a
anyway,
3-person
dance for me.
layout as soon as possible. We don't have it yet, so I can't do this. Here, you know what? I'll give video watchers a special treat for this. I'll swap to our 4-cam format so you can see. Yep, you can see. Hey, I'm apparently Alex and Wyatt is Brett, so it kind of works. But
That's the worst thing.
Do they get to see?
That's the
Do they
worst
get
thing
to
I
see
could
my
possibly
Devola and
imagine.
Popola Doge?
no,
They
because
get
it's
to
cut off
see
perfectly in the
half of
center.
you.
Oh, so sad.
That's the.
That's the worst thing you could possibly do to me is to turn me into Brett.
Yep.
How dare you?
So we have a
Exactly what
topic of this episode that I need to introduce. We're talking about old school and new school games, and just we're gonna take a look-see at some games that we've played that are old and new. And I want to be clear here: our definition of old might make some people realize that they're very old, including ourselves. Because I posted that my definition of old originally was like pre-2007. That's like 15 years ago now.
It's like when you first like read that to yourself, it's like 2000. Like what? That's
That's
what
not that long ago.
No,
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
But I will say, your reasoning when we were talking about it in the chat, your reasoning made perfect sense.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, that's-
I do stick by that
Yeah.
reasoning. What I actually meant was pre-2008, not 2007. I think 2007 is like the start of a bunch of new stuff, but it still feels old school. Because like 2007 was the first Mass Effect. I think it was Assassin's Creed. It was a whole bunch of bonkers games came out in that exact year that like still were old school, but started the new school kind of twists on what was popular. So that's a fun little history bit.
And now we're old.
And now we're all very old.
I saw a gray hair in the mirror this morning, but I'm fine.
I have so many of those. I'm so scared.
Look, senior year of college gave me like 14 gray hairs, and I just choose not to talk about it. So.
I gained some gray hair and then lost a bunch of others because I was just pulling it out of my head.
Great.
Due to a lot of different things.
But before we talk about our old school and new school games, we always do this little thing. Well, we do it when we care to do it, which is talk about news. We have 2 weeks worth of news because last week's episode was pre-recorded a week in advance just because of scheduling. So we weren't able to talk about interesting things. And there was some pretty interesting stuff that happened in the past 2 weeks. A lot of it is kind of behind the scenes stuff, but it could have some pretty far-reaching things. So I'm going to start off with the smaller news that I think Brett's going to get a tickle from. And Wyatt, you might as well, actually. So there's some heavy rumors now that we're getting a new Final Fantasy, not by Square Enix.
Yes.
Apparently, Team Ninja is heavily rumored to be developing a Final Fantasy game that is inspired by Souls, but is not a Souls-like. So for people that don't know, Team Ninja made Nioh and most of the Ninja Gaiden games. They're a pretty well-renowned studio. Their last few releases have all been incredible, so I am totally down to see whatever they're making. I'm glad it's not just a Souls-like.
Yeah. That'd be pretty sick. I would think I would be more excited if regular mainline Final Fantasy wasn't like already doing the ARPG thing, because now it's just like two different kinds of ARPGs. Like if FF16 was like shown off to be some kind of like turn-based thing or some different kind of combat, then I could see them wanting to be like, oh, let's also make sure the ARPG fans are happy by having another Final Fantasy. But this, not that they're going to be the same thing, but I think it's safe to say that they'll fit within the same like genre brackets probably. So
yeah, definitely.
Not disappointing, but mild excitement instead of extreme excitement.
I mean, I'm a relative newcomer, so, I don't kind of don't have a feeling one way or another. But
I think the biggest thing here is that we're seeing Final Fantasy games not being developed by the creative teams that normally do it. That's kind of more important than there's other things being developed, because like typically if we see a Final Fantasy spin-off, it's something that's really out of left field, something like Chocobo's Mystery Dungeon, or just some crazy thing that isn't really, I think, what people would want.
Wait, stop. Is that a real thing?
That's a real thing, yeah. It's
With
also apparently really good.
You were kidding!
I'm not joking. That's a real game.
There's like 3 installments too, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard they're good. But they're like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon type games.
The roguelikes too, as the first one is.
Yeah, well, Mystery Dungeon is always pseudo-roguelike, so they're a little crazy.
My god, okay. This Final Fantasy well is even deeper than I thought it was. And I played a game called Final Fantasy 15.
Yeah.
He just added a new game to his play next list. I just saw him do it.
And I do, normally we try to keep news topics pretty related to games. There is one news thing that's a little sad from this past couple of weeks that we learned that isn't necessarily related to games, but I think is still kind of important to mention. It's that Berserk's author Kentaro Miura passed away on May 6th at 54, so he's still pretty young. And the reason I think this is important to mention is that Berserk was like the inspiration for Dark Souls. It's the inspiration for so many games that we kind of have come to just enjoy now, and like it probably was one of the starts of the big giant sword thing. So
it's why Cloud has a Buster Sword.
Yeah, it's just a kind of a sad day, especially because Berserk's not finished. I think they have said that the studio that he'd been talking to may try to, but that's always iffy without the original creator around. But apparently he took like really good notes of what he was planning. So I've never read Berserk myself, but I do know like there's swords in Dark Souls that are literally just Guts' sword. So
the Bloodborne guy hanging upside down hunter symbol is literally the mark that Guts has on the back of his neck. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, it's always sad to see someone die from a situation that is not natural or not old age. It's just sad. Yeah,
especially when there's such an inspiration too. Like,
just so many studios. So another game that I've been talking about pretty recently a lot is a little game called Outriders. Outriders has had some. Hey, I really enjoyed this game. I think it's a perfectly good looter shooter.
And I'm so happy for
with the caveat
I also
that
am
like
happy for you.
the caveat that what you're getting with it is 4 fun classes and a campaign that's pretty replayable with all 4 of them. The end game's terrible. But like I've played hundreds of ARPGs, not hundreds, but like dozens at this point that have awful end games, and that generally doesn't matter that much as long as you're not a live service game, which Outriders is not. So I think the people that are really pissed off are people that are used to like the Destiny model of this looter shooter coming out and being supported for the next like 2 years as a service instead of something being built to have expansions. And Square Enix has also called Outriders its next big franchise after it's reached 3.5 million unique players. So Outriders is doing pretty well.
Lost them all.
Well, that's the thing, Brett. When you look at those numbers, like 93% lost after a month, that's gonna be the case for most games. Like Spiderman, I was not playing a month after release because I beat it. I was done. I did it. With Outriders, it's the same. You're not meant to keep playing the end game. Well, they probably wanted you to, but the end game's not good, so you're not gonna keep doing that. But the campaign, which is still like 20 to 30 hours, is really fun. So I had a great time with it. I think Square Enix is expecting to do super well with the franchise. I don't necessarily think it's gonna do that. I don't think Outriders is really a franchise game. I think it's a game that should get like 1 or 2 expansions and then a like gold edition release and then be done. Because it's really not that unique.
It's the kind of game where like 10, 15 years from now on whatever platform dethrones YouTube, you'll have people making up this is an underrated game from this era of gaming and no one remembers it videos.
Because I think the thing that's happened with comparisons is people are either comparing it to Anthem or just forgetting about it, and like forgetting about it is what's gonna happen. This is not another Anthem. It's not a game that like functionality wise just didn't work on release. It's a different situation, but yeah, I'm curious to see what Square Enix does, because I think if they just like come out swinging with a live service sequel or something, I don't think it's gonna work. But we'll see. You know, maybe they'll surprise us. It's always possible. All right, so we don't really attempt to sell ourselves as games journalists, at least not often. Vaguely, we're in that space, but we're more devs and people that just have an interest in games and talk about it. There's a little known publication called IGN that would probably be put in the same space. I'm not entirely certain I'd call them journalists all the time, but some of the time. Certainly.
It depends on who you get on what day.
Yeah. So, hey, some of IGN's staff are really, really great writers, but...
Oh, well, it's just, there's a lot, so...
Yeah, there's a lot.
I think there are some good, and I think a lot of who they get to be, like, on camera have really good camera presence. Yeah. It's just, you gotta have a convergence of the right people to make, like...
And, of course, you're not gonna know someone's a disaster until after they're a disaster. Like, that's always the thing with a public job like that. But yeah, what I was going to say is that they had written a tweet and sent it out supporting the Palestinian civilians with humanitarian aid in the ongoing kind of conflict in that area, which, of course, this is not the podcast for that kind of news. Go get your information elsewhere for that. But it's a horrid situation, and like it was just trying to get people humanitarian aid and stuff like food and medicine to victims. Then the articles and tweets that had been written were removed randomly, and then the IGN staff, most of them came together and have released a massive open letter to IGN's upper management criticizing that, which is something that we really haven't seen a publication do in a very long time. I think since like Gamergate.
That's a throwback.
That's a throwback, yeah. Jeez. I mean, we're talking about old stuff.
Classic Gamergate.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that hasn't happened in a long time, and hats off to all of the staff that submitted that letter and had the gall to stand up to management like that. But it's curious to see these kind of things happen. IGN really hasn't done anything about it yet. I'm betting we'll see some fallout of that soon. But there's no way, like, there's so many people that undersign this that there's no way they can fire them, because then IGN's out all of its staff, pretty much. Aside from, I think, their, like, editor-in-chief, and the editor-in-chief is probably just too high up to sign that, I think, is kind of the stance that was being taken. But yeah, it's just a situation that's kind of ongoing with IGN that is a little interesting. This is what happens when there's not a ton of games news to talk about. Studios go a little insane.
I do have a small little bit of news.
We're not done yet, but go ahead, Wyatt.
Okay. I didn't know if you were going to cover this, but as we all know, Skyward Sword on Switch is fast approaching.
Yep.
However, it's been under a tiny bit of fire recently, because it was announced that there's going to be some amiibo functionality that's raising some eyebrows. Namely,
I'd forgotten about this.
Namely, I forget which exact amiibo it is, but it basically allows you to fast travel.
It's one of the birds.
Right. It basically allows you to fast travel between kind of the surface area and the sky, whatever. I haven't played the game, but that's kind of how it's described. Anyway, but yeah, that feature is not in the game.
Yeah, it's the Loft
by
Wing
itself.
amiibo.
You have to pay $25 for that amiibo for that functionality.
And there's more clarifications to this, Wyatt. I don't know if you're going to go over them.
Go for it.
Yeah. So the big thing with this, a lot of it is fear mongering of people saying make sure you can fast travel. The only thing this amiibo lets you do is go back and forth between the hub and the point that you exit. There are also fast travel statues all around the world that you can use to go back to that hub. So all it basically does is give you like a one-spot ability to go back to that hub, which you shouldn't need. And my big thing is like, this is just a thing I don't think should be in the game more than like it should be added, because it breaks the flow of like if you're using this amiibo to go back in and out of a hub to like buy things and whatnot mid combat, and not mid combat, but like between encounters where you're not supposed to be able to do that. You're kind of breaking the flow of what the game was, and that's always the thing with Zelda games is they tend to have such great flow and like combat design and encounter design that's kind of ruining the experience for yourself. So I'm almost in the camp of like this is just dumb. The entire
I'm
thing.
I'm glad that it's not something that's like super important or like a lot of kind of meaty content, but it still feels it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. You know what I mean? Like there's a tiny little bit of scum going on.
Yeah, definitely.
It ain't great, but
it just feels like one of those decisions that was made by a separate department from the developers, and they were just like, hey, let's add a pseudo fast travel type thing to an amiibo because that won't be disruptive to the game, and then it probably will be disruptive to the game. But yeah, I think it's the kind of thing that like don't sweat it if you're not going to get that amiibo because you're probably going to have a better experience without it. I know I'm the kind of person that like if I have the amiibo there and the temptation to use it, I'd probably use it and then hate myself for it afterwards. Yeah, it's the kind of thing that is just a little sad. It's just why
if
why
you
Nintendo
can get the amiibo in the first place.
Oh yeah, because amiibo are notoriously difficult.
Yeah, they're so easy to come by.
Yeah. All right, we had more Halo squabbles.
Yay!
Where
the pain never ends.
Yay!
It's always fun with these Halo squabbles of there being like someone on. The thing I love about them is that it's so consistent with 343 that something will come out like the January build thing where it'll be like someone will say this, it doesn't make any sense, and then gets retracted immediately after. So I'm glad we didn't have an episode last week because we would have had to do that again. Of talking about the person who worked at 343's tweet that there was crunch on Halo Infinite, and then immediately like retracting that to make another statement. But yeah, that happened again. So we've got a lot of fun rumors circulating about 343 that are immediately being retracted. So that's fun to watch. It's just entertaining. All right. That's most of our news that we can actually report. There is a minor, I say minor, this is going to have big impact eventually, but WB Games has been split up and essentially dissolved into different companies or under a different thing. It's a little unclear as of yet what's actually happening because we just have financial information essentially. So WB Games is being broken up into different like sub-studios as AT&T is merging with Discovery. So it's being just moved around, but this means we may not see like the WB Games logos on new things.
Oh no.
all we literally know is that like WB Games itself is not staying just as WB. So some of the gaming arm is going to the AT&T side and some is staying with a new company. Yeah, it's just a weird situation. This likely means some studios that have worked together before on like the Gotham franchise and Arkham franchises probably won't in the future. This likely doesn't mean anything for Gotham Knights or any in-production games. One of the big things is that the Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor, and War devs have been kind of spun off into a newer franchise that's going to be doing more action-adventure games. Not confirmed to be any Lord of the Rings themed stuff, but more games in that vein. So a lot of interesting things we'll see payoff for in a few years, most likely. Just fun to speculate.
You're telling me we might not get a sequel to Cars 3 Driven to Win?
Look, Brett, I am sorry.
And you said this was minor news. And you said this was minor news. How
this is explosively major news. I don't know if I can continue. I might have to be the first one to leave in the middle of a podcast. I don't know. This is devastating.
Kind of spinning off of that. Did we talk about Starfield last week or?
I don't actually believe so.
Starfield
news is not on my list, so hit us up, Wyatt.
Yeah. Two small bits of news. One of them is that it's rumored, or I think it was. It's been a minute since I actually looked at the information, but there's rumors going around that Starfield is going to be an Xbox exclusive.
That was, I believe, confirmed by someone in like a
okay.
publishing department, but not the devs. So probably
Which doesn't
true.
Surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that much,
Yeah.
to be honest with you. Because it's not a franchise that's already established. So like if they tried to pull that with Fallout or Elder Scrolls, I think people getting pissed I think people getting pissed, it's a little bit more understandable. But Starfield is a completely new franchise, so I'm not at all surprised that Microsoft kind of wants to capitalize,
especially because Microsoft is letting PS4 still keep Deathloop as like this big exclusive for a little while. Yeah.
Microsoft cares a lot less what platform you play their games on, as long as you play.
As long as you're playing their games, yeah. But this does mean, I do think this does leave us open to the fact that we may not get an Elder Scrolls 6 on both consoles in the future. I'm not. It's just speculation at this point, because I do think Microsoft has to really weigh their cost benefit of that. Of like, is that going to sell consoles, or is that just going to make people pissed off? Because there is a huge risk there of a franchise like Elder Scrolls that's so kind of eponymous with games and is everywhere, that limiting that to one console, and I think especially the thing that would like make me sadder is that we wouldn't see utilization of features that are like the DualSense stuff, because having played Skyrim on the Switch with the motion, or not motion, but the HD rumble works really, really well in Skyrim. So I would love to see what they could do with the DualSense like triggers for lockpicking in Elder Scrolls 6. But yeah, that doesn't limit it, because like Metro Exodus is doing DualSense features on PC, which is very cool. But it does mean that we may not see that for Bethesda, because Bethesda kind of has a track record of not always being the most detail-oriented company when it comes to releasing games.
I wouldn't put it past Microsoft, because they always do their Elite version of their controller, right? I wouldn't put it past them to do some sort of like adaptive trigger or like special motor, function type of deal with like some Elite controllers. So
I think it's coming, but I think it's going to be like 2 years before we see that.
I think it's good that they're offering like a very basic, like here's just a regular old controller. I do like that approach. And then the other small bit of Starfield news that I wanted to talk about was, and this is coming from Pete Hines. He was saying that a release for it is still really, really far off, because development kind of began in 2018 with a really small team. And so they're still a ways off from, from anything substantial. But
which I am curious if we're gonna see how far apart the releases of Elder Scrolls 6 and Starfield are gonna be, because I could almost see them being, if they split into two teams, it'd be real funny if those games came out at like the same time.
Well, what's interesting is that we've basically received the same amount of information in the exact same way for both. Even though from what we understand, Starfield's coming first, it's like all we've really seen of them is a nice looking PNG of both, essentially, and that they're coming. Like that's all we've heard.
Well, we saw more. We saw the brief environment spanning trailer of like 30 seconds.
Oh no, we had that for Starfield. We had a nice little spinning galaxy with some stars and then the logos. It's essentially the same.
They just ripped that from Mass Effect. That was just Mass Effect. that's the
they just didn't tell anyone.
They just ripped it from BioWare. No.
But yeah, no, I mean, all that means is Starfield is a ways off, but I think we all knew that anyways. I'm just not even that like focused on it, to be honest with you, just because it's a ways off, and I don't want to. It's a Bethesda game, so I'm a lot more cautious than I used to be. Obviously,
scared even.
Yeah, a little scared.
Yeah, I'm a little frightened by anything Bethesda's putting out in the near future.
The optimist in me is like, okay, clearly they've gotten a lot of backlash to a lot of their decisions, and now that they're under Microsoft's wing, that's a lot more like. I would argue they're a lot more like player centric.
They keep doing it with Fallout 76. They keep doing it.
I know. I'm just too optimistic for my own good sometimes.
So am I. I want to believe, but my faith level in Bethesda has been steadily declining over the past decade.
Oh, it's been dropping like a rock. No, I'm there.
Because it is wild. The last game like Bethesda proper released was Fallout 76 and Fallout 4, because Skyrim was 2011, which is 10 years ago now. Skyrim is a decade old.
Well, yeah, it's very
Ugh.
clear that they're more focused on publishing right now, which is,
well, because people thought,
seems
like,
to
I
be
believe
working.
it was like a 7-8 year wait between Oblivion and Skyrim. Not even that long. Oblivion was like 2006, I think. Which people were like crazy about the wait between that and Skyrim. So I'm just curious to see what it's gonna be like when Elder Scrolls 6 is finally releasing. If we're gonna get like a Red Dead 2 level of hype for that game, regardless of like trailers.
We're coming on a 10-year anniversary for Skyrim, right?
Yeah,
Because
November.
I just realized 2011. Yeah.
Yeah, we're almost to the 10-year mark.
Wow, if I don't feel old yet,
big old Skyrim.
Boy, howdy, do I feel old now?
Maybe I'll play it for the first time on its anniversary.
Hey, I think you would probably hate Skyrim, bro.
I know, that's why I haven't played it.
But there's a minor chance you would love it, but I think 90% you're gonna hate it.
See, what's hilarious is that what are they gonna call their 10-year anniversary edition? Because they already have an anniversary edition. So what are they gonna call it?
They're just gonna re-release the anniversary edition without any changes whatsoever.
Release it on it's a Stadia exclusive.
Yeah, exclusive, even though it's already on like every single piece of technology that has.
And then they realize, oh crap, Stadia doesn't even. It's not even a functioning product anymore. At the
Stadia
end of
can't run our game from 2011.
Oh no! All right, that means we gotta get into our proper discussion here. We're talking about some games we played that are old and new. That's it. That's pretty much the entire topic.
Ta-da! Well, I did want to mention when we first started the show, you were talking about we were talking about like 2007, 2008. That's kind of what we deem to be like that.
I'm leaving definition to the individual. For me, my definition of old school is almost more of a mechanics thing than actual time.
No, but I wanted to bring it up because that's kind of like when I had played a video game off and on, but I never had my own like system or anything. And then like 2007, 2008, that's when I really like had my own console to play with. So it's really when I really started playing. So I feel like it kind of speaks to how I haven't played a whole lot of older games because that's kind of when I started, and when I was younger, I never really looked back that much.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's interesting that you mentioned that because that's kind of when I first kind of got into gaming as a whole. So anyway, little fun fact about me.
You're a baby.
little baby Wyatt. All right. But yeah, so to go over my definition at least, for anything old, I'm talking basically within 2 years of the Xbox 360 coming out is my definition of old school, which is crazy to think about because that was feels like not that long ago. But
and yet it does at the same time.
It also feels like a really long time ago. So
see, I'm getting flashbacks to the old like Xbox 360 menu, like before it started looking like Windows 10, like the original one where it kind of scrolled downwards. Yep. Do you remember that? Oh man.
Well, I think a good game to kind of kick this off with, because it's what I've been playing most recently, and it's also hot on the zeitgeist of games talk right now because of a certain trilogy collection that just released. And that's the original Mass Effect.
Snap.
So, for brief background, for people that haven't played Mass Effect games, because it's wild to say now because like 5 years ago that would have been insane speak, but now there's so many people that haven't played them or are just getting to play them now. The gist of them is that there's a sci-fi epic of 3 games, and the first game is a little unique because...
excuse me, 3 games and Andromeda, okay?
Andromeda's not part of the epic, Wyatt. It's a separate thing. It's not part of the epic. And you can guarantee that they are not going to talk about Andromeda at all when Mass Effect 4 inevitably rolls around. Andromeda has been scrubbed from the plate.
Just a small shame.
Yep. But I want to specifically talk about the original, because the original did some interesting things that we haven't really seen in other games, even in like later Mass Effect games, that kind of make me sad that we haven't seen them. At the same time, I get it, because like Mass Effect 2 is a better game than 1 by I think a pretty good margin, but 1 just has so many cool ideas for how to do like a third-person shooter RPG in a way that hadn't been done before and has not really been done since, unless you're looking at really wild indie games. Even then, I don't think I've seen one that's a third person. I've only ever seen first person stuff like I Divine Cybermancy is probably the closest you'll get to that type of progression in a game. But yeah, so what I'm specifically talking about with Mass Effect 1 is you're shooting guns like you would expect from a third-person shooter, except you don't have ammo. You have an overheat meter for every weapon. So think like the Covenant weapons that everyone hated in Halo that would overheat, and then you just couldn't shoot for like 5 seconds. That's how Mass Effect 1 worked with every single gun. Which is an interesting choice, but it worked for the type of game it was. And I want to make it clear, I'm talking specifically about the original version, not the remaster version that just came out, because that's the one I have the most experience with. It's the one I've replayed very recently and fully completed. So in the remaster, it's a little bit tightened up, and it plays a lot more like an actual third-person shooter. You still have like the overheating thing, but it's not nearly as crazy. I just think it was a really interesting mechanic for it because it made stat boosts and whatnot a lot more significant, and that would let you specifically like do DPS for longer in a way that you can't really control in a third-person shooter with ammo counts when you're making ammo like an actual thing you have to be concerned about. So I think it's
just something that you have to upgrade to the gun and not like a character-specific upgrade.
Well, it's also character-specific, so that's part of the other unique thing with Mass Effect 1 is the skill trees are a little bit more in-depth. They're more percentages and not necessarily like fun upgrades, but they are a little bit more complicated than you see in 2 or 3, which I think worked in Mass Effect 1's favor. It really feels like more of an RPG than a shooter. It's the kind of thing where like CD Projekt Red talked a ton about Cyberpunk being an RPG more than a shooter. Mass Effect 1 really feels like that, where they designed it first as like their big sci-fi follow-up to KOTOR, rather than being a shooter, and then as the franchise went on, they kind of adapted to that Gears of War mindset, the popularity of third-person shooters at the time, more of the proper cover shooter type deal with ammo and different types of weapons that respond differently, and like unique weapons where like one pistol doesn't act the same as another pistol. Whereas in ME1, it's very much a choice of like your 4 weapon classes are all very different, and they have different uses in different situations, but the different like shotguns typically function the same and are basically just stat blocks of what you like as well as visual blocks. But it does mean that like 1 has a lot more progression in terms of leveling than the other games. So originally 1 had a 1 to 60 level, and the later games had 1 to 30. The remaster tightens that back down 1 to 30 and then gives you more points. So it is kind of brought in line, but it still feels like you have a lot more, like, you're making a lot more character decisions and character build choices over the course of Mass Effect 1 than you are in 2 or 3. Of like every single time you level up, which is pretty often, you're getting points to spend towards all of your character upgrades, and you can choose like, okay, if I have someone in my squad that can do tech abilities, I don't need to do them. So I can then spec my character to be like guns blazing, or I can take a different character that does biotics, and then I don't need those because they have it. And Mass Effect was like one of those squad shooters that really pulled the cool stuff of you could open this wheel and like tell your allies to use abilities and maneuver them to different places, which was kind of crazy at the time. I think the only other game we'd really seen do a ton of that is stuff like SWAT and Republic Commando. I know why it loves mentioning Republic Commando. So
any chance I get, it's
excellent
any chance
game.
I get.
But yeah, well, I think 1 is just such an interesting game to look at because of how different it is.
It's a weird like transitionary period, right? And I think because you have a lot of people that prefer the way that the series went into being more of a third person shooter and being a little bit, you know, lighter on the RPG elements, and then you have others that prefer it the other way around. I think, like, looking at it from BioWare's perspective, I think I feel like what they wanted to do was they wanted to have Dragon Age be their very like traditional, more hardcore RPG with a lot of stats and stuff, and then they wanted to have Mass Effect have a completely different focus, more on like third-person shooting and stuff. And I think that was the right decision, because you don't want these two franchises that where like what changes is the setting and the characters, and that's enough for a lot of people. But I think them kind of embracing the shooter part of Mass Effect more was actually a really smart decision overall, just to give both of those series a little bit more identity.
Yeah, but you can tell a lot in how you can solve problems in Mass Effect 1 relative to 2 and 3. Mass Effect 1 puts a lot more emphasis on conversations being a valid option. And one thing I really liked is with the remasters that just came out, I'm doing my first Renegade playthrough because I could never bring myself to do it. Ever. And I was just like, you know what? I'm going to force myself to pick the dialogue options that are Renegade. And the fun
I hate being an asshole in games.
The fun thing in Mass Effect 1, Wyatt, is that a lot of the Renegade options actually avoid fights and aren't just kill the person. Of like, what it basically does is it really tailors you to be like a ruthless commander who knows how much of a badass they are. So you can walk in like after clearing a room of enemies and you see the next guy and you can just get a dialogue option if your Renegade level is high enough that's just, look, I just killed like 30 people. Do you really want to do this? And then they just leave. And that is so much more satisfying to me than the Renegade option always just being shoot someone.
Yeah.
Which
it's
going
a more
back
nuanced
more
approach
fun.
it's a more nuanced approach to a Renegade option, it seems like, which is really interesting.
Yeah, because I think people often complain about both KOTOR and BioWare games in general have done the binary thing a lot, especially in older games. They don't do them anymore, but in those older games, you almost always had just like a scale that would go back and forth, like Light and Dark Side, Renegade, Paragon, and those were almost always aligned to, is your character super mean? But they also tended to align to, is your character just like bloodthirsty? And I think for Mass Effect, that doesn't work. Or wouldn't work because they don't do it generally. It feels like there's a few side quests where they do, but in most of the main game, your options don't go down to just like ruthlessly kill everyone. You usually have an option to do that, but that isn't usually like the specific Renegade option. That's more just a thing you can do if you want to play that character. In one specifically, you get a lot of opportunities to like, the Renegade option won't be the shoot everyone option. It'll be the, you are so beneath me, like beneath my time and not worth it to do anything, and then you just get rid of your problem. Like it's a
lot of intimidation, right? Yeah. Like
it's literally the skill is called intimidation. Of like Renegade levels and Paragon levels unlock charm and intimidation skills in 1, and that's like I think that's the one thing from 1 I really miss in 2 and 3 is having specific dialogue skills instead of just Paragon and Renegade. And I don't think they should be tied into your leveling, because it does feel kind of bad when you're leveling up to have to be like, all right, I need to put this amount of points in my dialogue option skill set or else I can't do part of the game. So gotta do that, which just kind of like invalidates those points for every single player, because you have to spend them on one of those two options basically. So that you can get rid of that. But I do think having them be a representation of like kind of abstracting Paragon and Renegade a little bit more to charm and intimidate feels like a good option. Of like, you're not trying to charm people. If you're a military commander, you're trying to get them to do what you want because you're ordering them to do things. And that feels a lot better than, hey, I'm Mr. Gunshoot and I'm going to blast your face off.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, they made KOTOR first, so this whole Renegade and Paragon, it's obviously like they're lifting the same light side, dark side system. And it makes sense that it's more like cut and dry, black and white in Star Wars, because that's kind of how the dark side and the light side is portrayed, depending on which trilogy you watch. But here, where it's the lines are a lot more blurred for Mass Effect and all these different characters, it really doesn't translate quite as well. I still think it doesn't, like, it's not a bad system at all. I just think more work needed to be done to make it a little bit more gray than just like a static option.
Yeah, definitely. Which is funny because, like, if you go even further back in BioWare's history and look at Baldur's Gate, that's pretty much what Baldur's Gate did. Baldur's Gate used the D&D alignment chart, which is not really a sliding scale. It's more of just like general guidelines of what your character acts like. That means like a chaotic evil run in Baldur's Gate is fundamentally very different from a different type of run. And like that goes for every alignment in those games, because of the fact that they wrote the game to really incorporate those different types of characters, and you'll see completely different companions. Like characters that might have been your best friend in a different run will hate you based on like even if you're good or evil. Like evil characters will probably gravitate towards you and stuff like that. But it is like a very different experience that I feel like we don't get very often anymore. Of that, really catering to making sure that evil isn't just haha bad guy and is actually a lot more nuanced than that. We generally just focus more on having those heroic stories, and like I think BioWare especially has started to fall into the trap of if we're doing good and bad, it's gonna be directly good and bad. Like it's gonna be straight up ripped from Star Wars Light and Dark. Like there is no gray.
I mean, as someone who's written for games that have branching storylines, I definitely get it because it's way easier to make your choices way more binary. Yeah. In terms of when you're actually putting together your script and your story and you have to consider all these branching decisions, the more binary it is, the lot easier it is to be able to keep track of everything. So I definitely understand why it's made. But in practice, in the actual game, it doesn't always fit properly.
Yeah, and I think especially the scenario in Mass Effect that hurts it is that when you're doing those choices, you have to stick to one. Like it does not pay off at all if you like be in the middle and do Paragon and Renegade depending on the situation. You can't really do that. And the game will just kind of like you won't unlock the higher persuasion tiers, so you can't intimidate or charm the right people and get out of situations that would otherwise be really bad. Because Mass Effect 1 does that a lot of like if you have put your time into those skills, which makes them rewarding, but it also makes them mandatory, basically. The best solutions are always locked behind those in a lot of quests, which really means that you don't get to play the character you want to play. You kind of have to play either Paragon or Renegade.
It's kind of like creating the character that you want, and then it's like, okay, I have to take what I want now, and it's like, do I want it to be the Paragon or the Renegade? Yeah. And for me, thankfully, and I think for Ryan too, it's like whatever character I make is always going to try and be like a nice guy, and so it always aligns with Paragon anyways. But there's going to be obviously plenty of people that that kind of want to be a little bit more in that gray area, and the game doesn't really support that at all, for sure.
Well, because I tend to like having a character that has like a threshold of how much crap they can take before they get more serious. And the fun thing with Mass Effect 1 and Renegade is that's basically Renegade as you start the game just being done with it. And like that's what Renegade is. But in 2 and 3, I never really got that far in 3, but in 2 at least I remember a lot of those choices kind of boiling down to just, are you evil? And less of are you more of the military commander type? And I think that doesn't pay off as well. And it does feel very limiting.
And also just the story just fits the Paragon option more. Like if you're just looking at like regardless of the choices you make, well, somewhat regardless, the exact like story beats, it always like whenever I look back and say like, oh, what does a Renegade like run look like in this scenario when I played it? It's like, oh, it doesn't quite feel right. It doesn't feel as satisfying if your guy isn't like a goody two shoes like hero. It just never works.
Well, because Mass Effect falls into like the classic D&D thing of you need to have a reason to be on an adventure doing the thing, and like Commander Shepard still needs to be a hero no matter what, because Commander Shepard is saving the galaxy. If they don't care about the galaxy, the story falls apart. So Renegade can't be that. It has to be something different.
Especially, and I'm not going to give away any spoilers, obviously, but there's a lot of moments in 3 where you're doing all these crazy heroic things, and you're like, this would not work if you're just some asshole.
I'm curious to see what it's going to be like when I get there with my Renegade character, because I've never played like the latter half of 3, so I'm very curious to see how that's going to turn out.
Yeah, there's just a lot of moments where it's like, if I was a Renegade, I wouldn't be doing these things, or it wouldn't feel quite right. It's I don't know. It's a little strange. I do want to know what you think when you get there, but
absolutely. And yeah, just one other thing I want to shout out Mass Effect 1 for is having stuff like the different ammo options for different weapons, even though some of them are completely useless. Like my favorite one is one that bypasses shields, but you can get an upgraded one that's actually good, but the first version is just, it makes your bullet do dramatically less damage, and like a fifth of that damage will then bypass shields. It's so worthless at the start of the game. It gets good eventually, but it is fun to see like different ammo types, especially because they have different visual effects. So if you mod your gun to be like toxic bullets, you get to actually see the like toxic bullets and the enemies go into piles of goo when you shoot them. Not very realistic, but extremely fun. So I'm just glad that started in Mass Effect 1 and wasn't like a thing. That I think in the later games actually they did move away from the different bullet types, but it was more of a different weapon type situation. So they still kind of kept that whole aesthetic of your guns behave differently. It's just tied to the guns themselves and not the bullets. Just still fun. All right, Brett. Wyatt and I really went off on Mass Effect. You got some games you want to talk about?
Somewhere in a parallel dimension, there is a universe in which everything else has been the same except Castlevania Symphony of the Night released yesterday, and nothing else. It would just fit perfectly, because that game, literally, it could have released yesterday. And I think if you like just said to someone, like you just made them play like, I don't know, like the Xbox port or something, and you told them that, and they didn't know that it was an old game, I think they would probably believe you.
Only thing that would give it away is the font. That's the only thing, because the font's hard to read.
Yeah.
And the load times.
But like
some of the load times.
That game is how did they make that in 1997? I don't understand. It's literally every single it's like how sometimes you'll listen to music and then you'll see like an angry boomer in a YouTube comment be like, "Oh, this is what all these alternative kids are just wish they could replicate. This is the original." But it really does, and this is coming from someone who loves like Metroidvania.
Are you calling yourself a boomer, Brett?
We all are at this point. We're talking about how old we are, Wyatt. We're past boomer. We're elderly now. Like it really is though, just that thing that all the indies want to be, and is the perfect example of a Metroidvania. And I think even if you were to if you look at the the Metroid half of that and you look at Super Metroid, you could feel the age for that one a lot more than you can feel for Symphony of the Night.
Yeah, I actually had the experience of going back and replaying both Super Metroid. Well, replaying Super Metroid and playing Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the first time fairly recently, and Symphony of the Night feels like a modern game, like legitimately.
It does.
Of course it's 2D and it's pixel art, but like there's tons of indie games that release exactly like that. So
yeah,
it feels like a extremely well done game that like a Hollow Knight type studio, Team Cherry like studio could have put together yesterday and released, and it'd be extremely well received because it's extremely good. It's got tons of loot, which is like crazy to think in 1997.
Yeah.
The games that had loot is very small. You had your Diablo, and you had, I don't even remember if Baldur's Gate was out yet. Then it was around then, but those were your loot games.
So with this game having aged so well, does it speak to how ahead of its time the game was, or how the genre of like 2D Metroidvanias hasn't like been able to evolve quite as much, or is it some kind of interesting combination of the two?
I think
because I'm not super familiar. I'm not super familiar with Symphony of the Night. I know a lot about it, and I know
you would probably like
the genre, obviously, but I've been meaning to. I mean, there has to be a Switch port or something. Like it feels like the perfect kind of Switch game.
There's a PS4 port. You can play it on your PS4.
Okay.
PS5. No. Continue, Brett.
I think it is a funny mixture of the two, more than anything, because it's not like, all. I think probably platformers and therefore Metroidvanias are probably the most like indie made genre. I said that horribly, but you know what I mean.
Maybe roguelikes. Roguelikes are up there too, but
roguelikes definitely. Not to say that they don't often blend together very well a lot of the time.
A lot.
I mean, what have we all been playing recently? Anyway.
I think it's just a case of it's just so good. I don't know what else you could do in another version to make something
Brett,
that's better
have you
than
played
that.
Bloodstained?
Yeah, I love Bloodstained, but I like Symphony of the Night more.
So do I. So I think that's the interesting thing because they're made by the same teams.
Yeah, they are.
Bloodstained was not made by Konami, but it was made by Iga and his pals that left to make it. And Bloodstained is a great game, but when you play it, you can noticeably feel that it is mimicking the game that the same team put together like 20 years ago, which is bonkers. It's a weird feeling. It's still a great game, but it is like so strange to play that and then like think back and be like, huh, so much of this is just trying to mimic what Castlevania was. And I don't want to say that's a bad thing because in reality, we have not really gotten a proper Castlevania evolution of like what Symphony of the Night was in like a AAA game. It just hasn't really happened. To get like that kind of progression in a 3D space with stuff like I think the closest thing legitimately is something like Kingdoms of Amalur, almost like weirdly is I think as close as we've gotten to like that type of progression in an open world. It's weird. I don't think we've really gotten a proper replication of it. Maybe Nier's pretty close, but
so quick little update for you. I have not played Symphony of the Night. However, I just remembered years ago when I was rocking a DS, I did play Dawn of Sorrow, which from what I understand is actually very similar.
That's
from like Bloodstained was a mix of the Aria and Dawn of Sorrow games with Symphony of the Night, basically.
And I knew what Castlevania was. Like I knew, oh, it's the Belmonts, and it's this like 2D side scroller thing. And then I was like, oh, cool, I'll play this one. I was like, what is happening? Who are these people? I think I saw Belmont for like 2 seconds.
Well, I think Dawn of Sorrow is a sequel, isn't it?
Yeah, I think. Isn't that the one where there's like things in like space?
You play well. I think like Dracula's castle just like teleports to like Japan or something, and he plays a guy named Soma.
Oh no, Dawn of Sorrow is not what I was. Dawn of Sorrow is even weirder. Oh, it's this game. I've played this game. Yeah, I have played this.
It's pretty out there. I mean, but I think structurally in gameplay, it seems very, very similar. And I liked it. I remember liking it when I was younger. I keep meaning to go back and try them again. But
yeah, Castlevania series is super weird because most of the games don't do the same thing. It's almost like in that Final Fantasy vein of the games are all kind of inspired by each other, but they tend to go in different directions with a few mainstays. Because like Lords of Shadow is super weird compared to the rest of the Castlevania. Playing Castlevania like Rondo of Blood is a very different experience to Symphony of the Night, and all of them are good. It's just very, very different. They tended to not play with the same idea for too long.
I mean, even the jump from Castlevania 1 to Simon's Quest. Simon's Quest was this kind of weird, open-ended sort of adventure, whereas the original was way more just structured and linear. You know,
which makes going back and playing through the franchise really fun because they play very differently, so you don't really get the like franchise burnout that you would get with.
Well, it's the kind of franchise. It's the kind of franchise that you can adapt into a lot of different things because it's just it has that kind of Star Wars-esque flexibility where there's a lot you can do with it in terms of like adapting it into different genres, which is good for a long-running franchise to keep it fresh.
So, Brett, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
If you were to get a studio that would make they're pitching fully 3D, proper, I'm gonna say full remake, not a new game, but a remake of Symphony of the Night in 3D in the style of like Demon Souls, right? We're giving it to some studio that's gonna do that. What studio do you want?
You already got it. I was gonna say FromSoft.
I mean, Demon Souls was done by Bluepoint, not FromSoft.
Well, yeah, but original Demon Souls.
True.
I think from a Castlevania-esque game with FromSoft's like handling of, and I'm thinking more of like the atmosphere here with like the dark stuff, but then also like they're mechanically not exactly the same, but pretty similar. Not with like difficulty, but like in the getting of new things, and you do level up in Symphony of the Night. I think it would be pretty interesting to see a FromSoft kind of like reevaluation of what a Symphony of the Night could be in modern times, because they also do like so many weird things with like gameplay and stuff. If anyone's gonna think of like an evolution of what is already probably a nearly perfect game, it would probably be a weird ass studio like them.
I
Definitely.
mean, the two that come to my head is Santa Monica, who worked on God of War, which I think could be an interesting kind of pairing. Also, Ninja Theory, who worked on Hellblade, I feel like could bring something kind of interesting. If they brought that kind of same psychological element, that could be pretty cool. I don't know.
I don't have faith enough in them to get the Metroidvania elements right. I think you need a studio like FromSoft who's more in tune with how that environment design works. And that's not a knock on either of those studios because they're great. It's just Metroidvania environment design is so complex.
Well, in Santa Monica's defense, they did have some Metroidvania kind of elements. I'm not saying that God of War was a Metroidvania, but it had some.
But Symphony of the Night is the Metroidvania.
No,
it's
I get
the
it.
one. Like you can't.
I get it.
I don't want anyone without 10 years of experience designing Metroidvanias touching that game.
It can't be. It can't be. It has Metroidvania elements. It just has to be one.
It not even it has to be one. It is the one. Like whoever's remaking is gonna make it the Metroidvania.
But if you're adapting it for a modern audience, like I'm not saying that they should do this, but
I don't think they need to. I think Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
But that's what you were asking. 3D, but that's what you were asking us.
No, I was asking for a 3D remake of Symphony of the Night. Not adapting it for anyone, because I legitimately think Symphony of the Night's like design doesn't need to change.
Absolutely not, yeah.
Because like modern games are still mimicking Symphony of the Night's design because of how good it was. And if you go back and play it, like I think the only thing that will feel outdated is how like the health works with food and whatnot. It's still a little old school Castlevania, but everything else is very modern in how it works. You equip different weapons; they have different movesets.
Can I say too? What a great title! Symphony of the Night is such a fantastic title to a video game.
This is why I miss games with subtitles. Give me like a Final Fantasy with a subtitle.
Look, man, I get it. I get it. Like Symphony of the Night, it's great. Like it doesn't. It tells you some things about the game, but it's still pretty mysterious, and it just rolls off the tongue just so well.
Yeah, I don't know. I would love to see Horizon Zero Dawn, or Horizon Zero Dawn. Zero Dawn was the subtitle. The new subtitle is Forbidden West. I just want them to go crazy. I want them to come out with like a full sentence subtitle that is just bonkers.
Horizon Aloy's Wacky Adventure.
That'd be great. Yeah, I want to see more high budget like series games adapt that naming convention instead of just like putting a number at the end of everything. So I do think it gives some personality to things that you don't always see.
Yeah.
Aside from like just Dragon Age Origins.
I mean, I will say in Assassin's Creed defense, they try and pick words that like associate with the time period that they're in. So I'll give them that. Like Odyssey kind of makes you think Greek mythology, or Valhalla, obviously.
Yeah. I think that kind of the subtitle naming convention works better for games that are a little bit more experimental and going a little weird, of like how Castlevania tends to not have the same gameplay twice. I think it would work better.
Are you saying that Assassin's Creed does not have the same game?
Castlevania not having the same gameplay twice.
Are you saying Assassin's Creed is the same game? I don't understand.
I'm saying that everything Ubisoft makes is the same game.
This is a very unique stance that I completely don't agree with.
Never
whatsoever.
heard with ever.
That is a hot, spicy take right there.
Shameful.
Hey Wyatt, did you play any old games? Have you ever played an old game?
No. I'll answer for him.
I have been playing a game that kind of bridges the gap between old and new, which I think is an interesting thing to talk about.
He's lying. He hasn't played an old game. He's excuses.
I've been playing this recently as of like 20 minutes before the podcast started, so I feel like it's going to be easier to talk about. The Ratchet and Clank remake on PS4, I think, is an interesting, because the first game came out. What do you got to say, Ryan? Say it. Go on, say it.
look, having played one of the older Ratchet and Clanks, I haven't played some of them. I played one. The new one's very fun, but it feels notably different from how the old ones feel.
But no, and I agree with you. What I wanted to say was that a lot of the level design is the same from the original. There's some new stuff. Some of it's remixed, but after going back and looking at like footage from the original, a lot of the level design was the same, and I wanted to say that it holds up really, really well. Because the feel, the controls may be a little bit different. I can't speak to it. I haven't played the original, but looking back on it, the level design was a lot of it's very much the same, and it holds up really well. It's that kind of level design where it's not quite as like it sets up. It's kind of the best way I can describe it, especially for combat. It feels a lot like Destiny level design, in the sense that like it doesn't feel like it's super specific, but it's a good arena, if that makes sense. I don't really know if that makes any sense, but
yeah,
it's the kind of thing where it doesn't seem like super handmade, but it works really well as a combat arena. And for a game that came out in 2002, 2003, having level design that holds up to this day, I thought was actually really impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'd put other games in that as well, of just like throwing basically everything id Software made.
Oh yeah.
Of their level design definitely holds up. Even the OG Doom, like there's reasons people still go back and play Doom because it just feels right.
There's a reason the boomer shooter genre exists, is because the level design in those older like id shooters is so good. And it's something that we don't really get these days in like sort of larger scale games. So
yeah, not super common. Great. So now that we've all gone over at least one example of a game that we consider old, or in Wyatt's case from 4 years ago.
Look,
5 years ago.
Look. I chose that one because it's the one I've been playing most recently. All right. So that I haven't played old games before. Let's get that straight. I haven't
done it. Well, Wyatt, maybe this will give you a chance to enlighten us on some of your other old games, because the second half of what we want to talk about is old games versus new games in general, and like how the gaming landscape as a whole has kind of changed to favor different types of mechanics and different things. We're all familiar with battle royales kind of being the in thing for a while. It's almost on the way out now. But
hooray!
Brett genre and I are changes.
So excited.
And
Brett, can I get a hooray for battle royales?
No.
This is why I can't ever get through a transition without people lamenting something. It's either
Agony.
battle royales or hitting on Wyatt, but it's always something. Star Wars,
that
Mass
build
Effect.
From January that we won't stop talking about.
The build from January. Oh, that is an old game. So that fits
all the way from January.
All the way from January. All right. So what I do want to talk about is kind of the greater design things that have changed. And I think the easiest way to do this is probably to look at a few specific genres and not just as games as a whole, because that's a lot to talk about at once. But I think the best example now is looking at the trend for open world. How do you guys feel about the move away from levels and mission-based games to more open world being the kind of standard now?
I kind of want to let Brett go first.
Well, he knows that I have a lot to say. And this is,
I do
of course,
too, but it's very different. But go ahead.
This is talking like in the AAA space, because ND, like, partially because of necessity, and like they're still sticking to more, not necessarily linear things, but like more linear than open world.
Yeah, and I guess it's good to kind of say that indie, for this discussion specifically, is in a weird spot of a lot of indie developers will specifically try to emulate older styles of games or do completely new things. So it's really
a lot of randomly
harder
generated
to predict what indie games are doing, because if a thing's popular in indie, it's probably because it's a thing that either the devs really like to play, or it's something that is conducive to a small team making it. But yeah, continue, Brett.
I want to begin by saying that I do not think that games being open world is a bad thing. I think, however, that being open world comes with a lot of things that are not so good. Because, I really like the idea of just kind of being able to do whatever within certain, like, very, very vague, very blurred boundaries, and like that whole sense of like big, huge progression, and lots of like choice and stuff like that. That is all great. But the
However,
problem that is, yes, the inevitable, however, the problem that comes about is that not because they don't want to, but I'm gonna say because they don't want to, because it's what it feels like sometimes, because no one does it anymore. It's like devs don't want to put in anything. They don't want to put anything into the world that's open. Just it's usually a lot of nothing, and it is open, and it is certainly world, but it's like you just put me on like Mars or something
it
with
feels like a really
nothing.
long level select, basically.
There's just, it feels like there's nothing, and if there's the biggest problem with open world as a thing that everyone is pretending is the greatest thing ever and everyone wants to move towards, is that like there's got to be something in it. It can't just be an open world and that's it. Like it has to be full of things. And I think as a whole, I prefer um things that are a little more linear and a little smaller, because they are usually more fleshed out than these other things that are always touted as being like huge open world, full of detail, bigger than this game's world, bigger than this game's world, bigger than this real life country, and yet it has like sometimes no human NPCs in it. It's yeah, that lack of detail really just kind of is one of the big things that's kind of pushing me towards those indie studios that don't bother with trying to go super crazy with open world things.
Mhm.
And then now my rant is over, and I know why it's here to say the exact opposite.
Yeah, I mean, I just
Well-
want to add my voice to Brett's. I think I really agree with a lot of what he just said. And yeah, that's basically my feeling on open world. I'll have more that I'm going to get into once Wyatt gets that look off of his face. But
Well, I'm
yeah,
gonna
I really
I'm
agree with
gonna
Brett.
I'm gonna give Brett a shock to the system here because I do agree for
Wyatt,
the most part.
you just
Yeah.
unknowingly made a wrestling joke.
Oh no!
Call out to
but-
when I mentioned Undisputed Era. You did it. Be proud of yourself.
But I don't disagree with you. I think there's a lot of open world games that have that problem of like, here's a bunch of like essentially levels and they're all connected by a world. It just takes a long time to get to that level. So what's the point? Like, I think there's a lot of open worlds that fall into that trap, specifically because they want to be just big and like, look how big our world is. And I've said this, Ryan has said this, we've all said this multiple times. Having a bigger world does not make a better open world game. I mean,
Hey Wyatt, remember playing Final Fantasy 15?
Oh man, I know, but thank you for reminding me. Final Fantasy 15. No matter what you want to say about an Ubisoft open world game, is one of the largest, most empty, most boring things I have ever seen in my entire life. It is so much. I don't know if I can properly describe to you how much worse of an open world it is than like almost any Ubisoft open world game. Okay, because here's the thing. Yes, Ubisoft open worlds, they're huge. They have markers all over the place. But here's the thing. They actually have things in the world. No matter how minute or how useless they may seem, it is still filled with things you can interact with. Not just giant fields of absolutely nothing that you either have to have a car or a chocobo to cross in order to not want to gouge your eyes out. At least they have things that you can pick up and interact with. But anyway, thank you for bringing that up, Ryan.
Oh, I thought it was a great example of what you were talking about.
Oh, it was. You did get my blood pressure going here, but I think I will be fine.
I hope.
But what I did want to say, and look, I've said it again, I've said this multiple times. I don't hate like a good Ubisoft open world. A lot of people do, and all of the reasons that they have listed, plus the ones that that Brett have listed are completely fair. But what I think when an open world game, to me, it's like, oh, this is like a thing of beauty, is when it gets its sandbox elements right. And I think Ubisoft games do that so well. And one of my favorite examples is still Far Cry 5. Not everyone's favorite in the series, but I personally love it. You just get these awesome moments of, oh, I'm gonna go attack a cultist camp, right? And I have my awesome sniper sidekick as well as a giant grizzly bear named Cheeseburger that I can send in to attack everyone. Already an awesome setup for a bit of combat and a bit of fun. But then, oh no, a bunch of more grizzly bears just out in the open world is already terrorizing them. That's awesome. Like, you get this other faction that's coming in and kind of messing up your plans, and you have to adapt to it in a really interesting way. And then while you're fighting, there are some resistance fighters that are just driving along the road and like, oh crap, what's going on? So they hop out of their vehicle and then they get in the fight. So it's this giant, like, just mess of like everyone like being thrown around by grizzly bears and a bunch of fire and grenades being thrown around. And it was awesome. I think one thing a good Ubisoft open world has is awesome sandbox moments where everything just converges and it turns into complete chaos. And it's great. And there are so many moments that happen in especially Far Cry 5, but even things like Watch Dogs Legion that are memories I'm not going to forget because they were so goofy and weird and so much fun. And that's what I love about open world games, is just having all these different systems and all these different things just like collide with each other.
Yeah, so I think you have a good point about Ubisoft games specifically. I think that leads to kind of reveal what the greater problem is with a lot of modern games, especially studios that look at open world. And I'm worried Halo Infinite's going to fall into this category of, they look at open world, and what they think is, okay, this is an industry trend that people are liking. They see that being the trend, and their analysts look at it and are like, okay, games that are open world do really well. So we're going to make an open world. What I think needs to be a step in that process is really looking at the type of game that you are making and like analyzing if it's going to fit. Because Final Fantasy 15, I think, is the best example of it. Of 15 is an open world game. Final Fantasy 12 is also an open world game to a degree. It's open world in the sense that you can go basically anywhere once you've unlocked the areas, but it is segregated into little areas just because of like PS2 loading. So it isn't fully open world, but I think they work very differently and they accomplish the same goal. 12 accomplishes the goal, 15 meanders around and then kind of dies.
15 accomplishes nothing other than just pissing me off. That's all it accomplishes.
Look, I gave Final Fantasy 15 like 60 hours of my time. It's time I'm not going to get back.
I gave it 6.
Yeah, I completed that game. But 12, I think...
Why would you do that to yourself?
12 utilizes the pseudo open world to get the feeling of adventure as high as possible. Like, it really makes you feel like you're going on this globe-trotting adventure on the PS2, which is kind of this crazy use of tech at the time. I think 12 is a game that really exemplified what you could do as a studio, as just making a weird JRPG. And Brett didn't like it, I know that, but I loved it. So I think it just also shows that
someday
games can do vastly different things and succeed to different people. But 15, I think, is the one that they kind of... I have a feeling they originally wanted to go for that same thing. Because you can see at the start of 15, they do the whole thing where they show you the villains. They're like, look at this evil empire and all these completely like character modeled people with unique faces that are talking about their evil plan. And then it turns out... I'm going to give a minor spoiler warning for 15. Because this is one...
Oh, no,
it's a spoiler in the fact that, like, this never happens in the game. You never get to see those people again. You don't see them again at all.
You're going to spoil the whole experience.
Wyatt, there's this whole bit where you see, like, in this cool spaceship-looking thing, these Empire people come down and they give, like, an evil speech about your father, and they're like, oh, look at your city, we've done things to your city, and then they leave, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to go do something to them later on in the game, and you never do.
Ryan, are you saying there's an aspect of Final Fantasy 15 that isn't good? because that
well,
is,
I'm saying
that is
I think they
outrageous.
wasted their time so much on creating 2 games. I really think Final Fantasy 15 is a game that feels like they took, okay, we want to have this emotional story about brotherhood and this band of great friends kind of going on this adventure.
They're a
that
boy
is, like,
band. Please
this
get it
boy
right.
band going on their tour, giving performances. Eventually, it's going to go out in this big bombastic like concert, and except that part is cool. That's the fun part of the game. The part that kept me playing it for as long as I did, and then you get to the ending, and you kind of just realize that, like, wow, like, maybe half of what I did was fun. The other half is just nothing. Like, it is really just nothing. In the weirdest way of, like, you look at this open world and it's beautiful. It's a really, really well crafted landscape. But it's a landscape. It's not a game world. Like, they literally just made planes and things to go around, and it's fun to, like, drive your car for 10 minutes in that. And then it kind of falls apart because you're like, well, I need to get to the next area to do this mission, but I can't because I need to go grind levels so I can get the better talent points, so I can use the craft to gather the consumables to make magic, because magic is not a thing you can just do. You have to go craft consumables to do it.
And
it's a mess.
Like I said before, they don't fill it with things to collect, and they also don't utilize a sandbox in any way. And again, that's what I will praise Ubisoft open worlds for.
Well, that's what I think. Why
tools
you got right is that sandboxes are really the any game that wants a sandbox element to its main progression. I think Watch Dogs Legion is a really good example of. Legion is kind of this. It's not a perfect game by any measure. I think it's like a swimming in sevens game, but the open world itself is a really great playground for the tools of your team, and the team being that, like, random thing is just a super cool kind of sandbox way to interact with the world. And I think that's, like, the kind of game that really does need an open world, are those games where you really want those exploratory bits. Metal Gear Solid 5 is a good example of, like, 5 had 2 open worlds of, like, these 2 different areas you could go to. You generally only stayed in, like, one area for a mission. You'd be in one specific zone, but it did mean that, like, you could go out and explore if you wanted to, and, like, take down the bases in different ways. And it's a game that, like, wasn't really structured as an open world game, but had an open world that you could do a lot of fun things in, and they knew the size to make the world so that it wasn't too much. That's another common issue. It's like companies will make these massive worlds that just have nothing, like 15, like just nothing in them. Like,
or it'll be here's half the map full of cool stuff. Now we have to copy and paste it a bunch of times, so it's no longer interesting. I mean, again, that's why I think that even though it doesn't have as many sandbox elements that I was talking about in Far Cry, right? I think Immortals is probably their best designed open world in such a long time, if not ever, because they really were not focusing on making a big landscape, right? It's pretty small in comparison, but every section of the map has some unique point of interest to it, where it's like, oh, here's like a pile of rocks. What the heck's going on over there? Or here's this really cool statue. I bet there's something at the top of that statue if I go and climb it. You know, they did a really good job of just taking interesting landmarks and then just placing them next to each other and having minimal amounts of just, like, field to separate them.
Yeah. I really do think it's, like, it's such a tool that gets misused so much.
Yeah. Anyone that doesn't like an Ubisoft open world game, look, I get it. I get you. But try Immortals, and I think that's, like, the remedy that you've been looking for, or, like, the type of open world that I think you want more of from.
I don't know. I'd actually kind of disagree. I think Legion is a better showcase of open world because I bounced off Immortals.
It depends on the person.
Pretty hard.
But it wasn't because of the world. To be fair, it had nothing to do with the open world design.
It was to do with the gameplay mechanics not interacting in a way that I think was conducive to the open world design as much as they had billed it as. I still think it's a good open world game. It's just, for me personally, they're trying to mimic a lot of what was good about Breath of the Wild with a set of mechanics that doesn't allow you to interact with things in the way that Breath of the Wild did, which makes it feel a lot more static.
I don't think it's nearly as, like, well utilized, but I think for a first attempt at an open world like that, I think it's pretty solid because
I mean, that's the thing. You got to realize Breath of the Wild was a first attempt.
That's true.
Like, there's a scale here. But I do think if you already enjoy open world games, Phoenix Rising is probably for you. If you are more on my end and you like my biggest thing with open world is the Hitman games aren't open world by really any definition, but the levels are very open in that they're large sandbox levels. I think that is like the perfect size of level for that kind of game, and that's what developers really need to do is like look at what is working for you. Are you getting what you want? Because like Red Dead and GTA have a purpose behind open world of like they want to have those social encounters that you can really build upon with things like the multiplayer systems. But when you look at something like, I'm just going to use Assassin's Creed 3 as the example here because that's the one that everyone likes to rag on. It's just environment. It's just environment with no purpose, and that's always an issue. Of like, you can have environment with no purpose in a game that's encouraging that of like that you can take your time and like look around, but Assassin's Creed is not a franchise that you can do that in, so it's very much that kind of situation of you really need to look at what you're doing. Cyberpunk, great example, and we talked about Cyberpunk very much. I mean, do you really think the open world was that necessary at the end of the game? I didn't do anything in it.
It was really fun to get certain cyberware that allowed you to access more parts of the city.
But there was nothing there. That's always the problem.
No, but I feel like if I were the kind of person that went on those like legendary like GTA 5 rampages where you're just like shooting tons and tons of people and causing a lot of carnage, having that option of like being able to climb on rooftops and stuff could be really nice.
Which would work if the like crime systems were working the way they were intended to.
I think they because it also doesn't have the same kind of interactable elements that like Watch Dogs Legion had.
Well, because when I think of like Night City, every single time I was doing something was part of a mission. The only time I was ever interacting with the open world was getting from one mission to the next mission.
Yeah.
Which I guess is like it doesn't serve a bad purpose of because Night City isn't that big. Like it's not the biggest open world map by a long margin. It still works for the game because you're kind of learning the different areas. It's almost like that Yakuza sense of like you learn the different districts and everything. But it is like a different thing.
And I agree with you that from a gameplay perspective, it's not as like interesting as like Watch Dogs or something like that. But for me, it's small enough to the point where I'm not getting bored or frustrated about how spaced out things are. And also just from a visual standpoint, it's like one of the most like beautifully realized open worlds I've seen, just in terms of like how the city works, all the advertisements and the hustle and bustle of everything, I think is so interesting and fun to look at that I didn't really mind just because I liked walking around. Like even if there was nothing to actually get from a gameplay perspective, I was just so fascinated by the world because I wasn't at all familiar with like the property ahead of time. So it was just cool to look around and see how Night City worked just visually because it was so well done. And because it's small enough, I never got bored of it. So I think it's not, I still liked having it there just because it was so well realized. But from a gameplay perspective, it's just kind of nice.
I mean, I'd say the same thing about Spiderman, having just replayed the original and Miles Morales. The open world doesn't do anything, but it's nice to have because you get those moments of like you can walk around the different areas of Manhattan and see how much detail was put into every little thing, and like that can be super fun to do just as like a side thing.
I did want to bring up Spider-Man for a second because that does something where if you're going to have an open world game and you're going to have it be like, okay, here are set missions and there isn't a lot of sandbox stuff going on, you can kind of skate it being a boring open world if you do one thing. If you make getting from point A to point B
absolutely
fun and interesting or cool, then I don't like the open world. That's fine because it allows you to swing. And if that's the entire reason the open world city exists is just allow you to swing,
which I think it is.
Yeah. And it's also small enough where you're not spending too much time and getting bored of it. It's just the right amount of like, okay, like I'm having fun, next mission. So there's never a moment where you're bored because even if you're in a mission and that mission is fun, in between missions you're swinging and it's so much fun. It's so satisfying that it never loses your interest for a single second.
Yeah.
That was something I realized after my first playthrough. Like, there wasn't a single moment where I was bored, even in this open world game that really doesn't have a lot of stuff going on in the open world, other than some like, gotta stop the car or whatever. The swinging is so much fun that I don't care.
Definitely. All right, Brett. You've been waiting in the wings because you hate open world games. Right? That
I don't I don't hate them.
you
Well,
just,
okay, I
you
don't hate the
play them.
concept of an open world game. I hate games. I hate a lot of games that just also happen to be open world, or they just don't interest me.
I think that's what we were talking about, of like games that don't need to be open world being open world and it making them worse.
Yeah.
Consistently. But Brett, I do want you to give us a genre to look at of what's changed. What's your pick for something that you are the expert of?
I wouldn't say that I'm expert of. I'm gonna do two at once because I think separately the discussion would be short, and I think they're similar enough where we can mush them together. These one of them kind of exists, but these are two genres that are on the danger, the extinction watch from the Environmental Protection Agency of gamers. These are like shoot 'em ups and rail shooters. They just kind of don't really exist anymore, and I'm interested by this because I realized this a little bit ago when one of my friends was playing it's called Sin and Punishment for the game, no, for the N64, and then it got put on the Wii. It's a rail shooter and it's really awesome, and it's like, man, why can't we get more of these? And then I looked for more, and there just aren't any recent ones at all. Like Star Fox, no. Any of the classic rail shooter thing. There was a Panzer Dragoon remaster that came out a little bit ago that is on Steam.
Is Killer 7? You looked into Killer 7?
Excuse me, are we forgetting the rail shooter, the classic Rambo the video game? Are we just going to ignore this?
Brett,
entirely?
get us out of here. Brett,
yes, we are. and to a lesser degree, shoot 'em ups. There's I know a new R-Type just released a little bit because it was on my fantasy publisher or whatever list. But shoot 'em ups is another genre that's just kind of not happening anymore. It's outside of indies. Indies still do shoot 'em ups.
And Japan. I want to specify Darius and R-Type are still going pretty heavily, but it's very rare that the West gets them. Those are really, really heavily Japan-based and don't tend to make it to the West because they just don't sell well.
See, these are 2 of the 75 genres that are covered in Nier Automata.
not rail shooter.
I don't know, rail shooters, yeah. I don't think Automata did a rail shooter.
No, there are segments that are kind of...
Those are shoot 'em ups, not rail shooters.
Rail shooters
no,
is
not,
like...
Okay, that's fair. But you did mention Bullet Hell, and that was another one that it also does.
Bullet Hells are still going. Bullet Hells are going strong. We're just seeing fewer shoot 'em ups and specifically rail shooters. I do think if you haven't looked at Killer 7, Brett, take a look at that game because it's wild. It's a rail shooter where you're a detective like solving murder mysteries, and it's made by the people. It's made by Suda51. So
never mind. I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that game needs to be on your list if you haven't looked at it. That is very much a Brett game. But yeah, I agree with you. I haven't seen very many. Sayonara Wild Hearts comes kind of close to being a rail shooter at certain points.
Another wonderful title.
Sayonara Wild Hearts is an excellent game. It's really, really good. It's basically just like a playable music album. But it does have some like rail shooter segments. Yeah, I don't think I've seen like a proper rail shooter release in a very long time.
Rambo the video game.
Actually,
proper.
Brett,
y'all are sleeping.
Have you not played Galgun?
Oh my god! I thought we couldn't get lower than Rambo.
But that's still going. Galgun is still making games.
It did get a sequel.
It got a remake recently.
Oh my god.
We're just not going to talk about Rambo? Is that what's happening here?
It's either that or Galgun, and I don't want to talk about either.
Are you sure rail shooters are a dead genre?
You know what? I don't think they're a dead genre anymore. I just think they're a zombified genre. They died in some ungodly force. Yeah, the horse has been beaten dead already, and some necromancers brought it back with disgusting buff men and
schoolgirls
panties. Ugh.
That is, yep. That describes Galgun. So.
Guys, Rambo is so good you can't even officially buy it on Steam anymore. That speaks to its quality.
It's a limited time release, just like people yell at Nintendo for doing that. Guess what? Rambo did it first.
Yeah, I mean, I do find it legitimately interesting that we haven't seen at least like indie attempts at rail shooters. I think we've seen some that are like kind of close, but rail shooters are probably expensive to make. Would be my imagination of like why we don't see them, because you need to have enough content to support a decent length of play, and with a rail shooter you're losing out on being able to build like an environment that has different areas. Brett, I just thought of a proper rail shooter that just released and reviewed extremely well. Pokemon Snap is a rail shooter.
I really am gonna leave at this
point. Not joking. I'm not joking. The game has reviewed incredibly well. I've been meaning to pick it up.
I'll give you that one.
That's a rail shooter.
I'll concede. I'll concede on your stupid technicalities.
Well, I think part of like because railguns, rail shooters. I feel like railguns. That's where my
railguns certainly are not dead. Railguns.
Yeah. Excuse me. No, but like those games are best in an arcade. You know, like that kind of genre. It's like you gotta have the gun, you gotta have like the big screen, and maybe like a buddy to like help you out and stuff like that. And like trying to translate that to a keyboard and mouse or a controller just isn't the same. You know, like I think with the advent of VR, I think we could have some pretty nuts rail shooter type of games. I think that could be a legitimate like resurgence in that genre.
Definitely,
like if you really like use the VR headset in an interesting way, like I think rail shooters could come back in a really interesting way. But I think trying to like take a railgun and have it be on a keyboard and mouse, you just lose so much of what makes them fun. Because instead of holding this big plastic gun and waving it around and kind of getting into it, now you're just kind of moving your mouse or a thumbstick, and it's just not nearly as engaging on a control method like that.
I could see that. I think also that it's not like not that that's not like a reason or anything, but it's also not that limiting. Like people could still do it. Like I'm thinking about, because I feel like most of what people would think was, oh, rail shooter, like that turret section in COD. I don't want that whole game of just that. That's nothing. There's nothing there. And meanwhile, it's like they're basically like rhythm games at points. Like you got to dodge things at the right time. You got to pick what you got to do.
You just need to
like
be creative.
It's you need to be creative with the things. It's not just sitting there and you move the reticle. Like that is what makes having the big plastic gun and the really loud music fun, because that is, you know, that's what you're doing. But like having like super tightly timed like dodges or something with things coming at you, and like just that really hard difficulty and wacky concepts as to why this is a rail shooter and not a normal shooting game. I don't know. There's a lot of what is the I'm trying to make a verb out of like cartographer, and I just can't. I want to say cartographied, so I'm gonna say cartographied.
Uncharted.
Okay, Mr. Webster's dictionary.
There's uncharted territory in the railgun space.
There we go. In the railgun space and the rail shooter space.
Well, that's why I think the best. I mean, I think ultimately because you can. Because I think like ultimately you can have that sort of more interesting gameplay, but also have that kind of presentation that an arcade has if you use it in VR. Like that's why I think definitely. Like why even, because at this point why even bother having it on a controller or a mouse when you can do it on VR?
I mean, I honestly
that's
think
kind of what I'm
rail
saying.
shooters would be great on mobile. Like that feels like a genre that I would
too.
love to, like, your fingers just be the reticle, and then you have like a great formula for mobile games that are snappy, they're quick to play.
Plus, you can do things like swipes and
you can do tons of like Infinity Blade style gesture controls. Like I would play a rail shooter on mobile. I think that'd be a great fit for it. But yeah, I do think if we're seeing rail shooters modern times, it's usually as like a segment in a game, not as a game itself, which is a shame. But also, I do love that games still have like rail shooter segments. I mean, people meme the Yakuza one to high hell because of the fact that Kiryu kills like 8 people in that scene, and then immediately after it has like a big emotional moment where he's like, "I never killed anyone," after you shot a helicopter down with a gun.
That's fantastic.
It's very funny, but yeah, I love rail shooters being little segments in games. It varies the gameplay, and I'm always a fan of that. Yeah, shoot 'em ups. I don't know if we can do anything about them.
That might just be a thing that Japan likes, and it's just gonna stay there
because they're being made. We're just not getting them.
Yeah,
it's an unfortunate situation if you're a fan of them. Although I will say, there is a giant, like, I think R-Type and Darius both have collections on PS4, and the Darius one is really good. There's also, I think, a Danmaku one, and they're both like super solid collections of like 30 or something games across the course of like decades, and you can play these crazy levels and whatnot. I remember those being like really fun. They had tons of unlocks and like progression that you wouldn't expect from a shoot 'em up.
I'll also suggest if you have a PS4 or PS5, Resogun's a lot of fun as well. That was actually
Resogun's great.
That was a PS4 launch.
It's a Housemarque game, isn't it?
So it is, and they even have in Returnal, they have a little like amiibo statue of like the human characters that you would pick up and rescue. That's in the cockpit of the Celine ship. It's really cute. Anyway.
Yeah. That is
and that one has
fantastic.
an awesome visual. That one has an awesome visual style as well. Just want to point out, and music.
And yeah, I think we want to kind of cap in this discussion with it. Just, it feels like in a lot of modern games that people are kind of straying away from experimentation in the majority of AAA studios. I don't want to say all of them because we are getting games like Death Stranding. We're getting games that do push some boundaries with what they're doing and are not what we'd expect. But it's not the Wild West of games where, like, Brett, I know you've been going back and playing a lot of PS2 era JRPGs, and you've probably seen how different they all are.
It's just insanity. Nobody knows what they're doing. It's insane.
Like I love that. I love the era of, if a game came out, you had no idea what the controls would be because it was the Wild West of like, what is happening.
Well, I would say going further back than the PS2, like all the way to the 70s, like the Atari 2600 era and all of the crazy amounts of like weirdo consoles and Pong consoles that came out of that they were all completely, I mean, ColecoVision, you had a controller that was basically just a number pad with this weird like joystick, or like the Intellivision was the same thing, but it was a disc. Like there was no one had any idea what they were doing. It's insane to think about now that everything is so like structured and there's a clear roadmap.
Basically, what I want is for Ubisoft to come out with a game that's just like completely nonsensical, that is a return to form of just come up with the weirdest control scheme you can think of for like a third-person action game, and then apply it to Ubisoft's next title, so that way we can get like some crazy, strange technology. Things like the Pathless, I think, are a great example of just like being
100%.
Very unique mechanically and being willing to do different things. I think we see that a ton in indie space, but not a lot in AAA.
Another example of an open world game that doesn't really suffer anything from being an open world because it's so much fun to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, so traversal.
And I do want to say too, as we're kind of like looking at everything as a whole, for me, one of the reasons that I play newer games rather than going back more is, you guys know me, I'm a very story heavy person, and I think now more than ever video games have the breathing room to have really great stories that are also told in a visual way. And I did a whole presentation about this a couple of years ago, but
I mean, we're going to end up doing a whole episode about this topic because
Yeah,
It is,
but
large.
not to say that games in the NES didn't have good stories, but they obviously didn't have the time or the technology to like visually show it in an interesting
It's primarily
way.
tech.
And
Like
so even
the fact that
Yeah.
like the technological jump from the last 20 years is bonkers. Like a game like Baldur's Gate has an incredible story, but it's told just through text, right?
Yeah.
Because like that is all you could do at the time. You couldn't really get crazy in that kind of game. Like maybe if you were making this weird maze first person dungeon crawler type thing, you might be able to do some funky tricks, but it's still gonna be tricks that you can't really have like full voice acting or crazy things like Disco Elysium, just having your head talking to you. Just wasn't a thing that was thought of.
And now we have games like Journey that is not a single spoken word of dialogue, and it is all visual and atmosphere, and it's wonderful. And so again, that's part of the reason why I preferred like newer games, is because maybe the stories aren't quite as good as what you'll get on an NES, but they're told and they're visual and they're shown in such an interesting way because it's
Just
a
don't wanna
visual.
read.
It's a visual medium, and I really feel like you need to be able to take advantage of that. So even if there's a story that maybe, the characters aren't quite as interesting or the plot isn't as tight as it could be, if it's told in in a visually interesting way, I think that makes up for a lot of what the actual plot is. Like if you can dazzle someone visually well enough and have a good enough story to go on top of that, I think that speaks a lot. But
And I think also now we have more, like, I guess, respect for the medium as something that should be, like, in the case of voice acting, voice acted for, because like it's not like, oh, the second that I mean, I guess it is true. The second that games could have voice acting in them, is like everyone like, well, this is the way to tell the story. But then like you go back to like Final Fantasy X, and it's like, I don't like your plan. It really sucks. And it's like maybe we should.
I love Final Fantasy X's voice acting so much.
Is
I
that
get
where the
so much
laugh-
entertainment.
Is that where the
out of
laugh
it.
meme comes from? Just
That's
the guy
it
with
is,
that
yeah.
horrible. Yeah.
So
Well,
bad.
and also you're getting people that are more dedicated writers. So it's not like,
Yeah.
oh, some guy that was working on some of the art is now writing because we don't have any time for the story. You have
dedicated
writers.
video game writers, like people that have spent their life writing specifically for an interactive medium, is super important. Because like Kingdoms of Amalur is a great example. It was written, the story was written primarily, or not primarily, but in hand with an author that is like extremely well known. R.A. Salvatore has published tons of books that are really good, but Amalur's story was a little bit hard to follow and just very super lore heavy and just tons of text. And
translate.
It would probably have worked great in a book, not so well in a game, because you have to like, you don't have any of the context or the time to deliver that context in a way that is visual if you're just doing it all through dialogue. Yeah, I do have to cut off our discussion because we're hitting our end point. We're getting far in the episode and we haven't done the game yet.
Oh God,
we've got, we always do a game. So I'm gonna give you 4 companies, and then I'm gonna tell you the name of one of their earliest games. And what I want you to do is tell me what company made what game. All right. So the companies, for your knowledge, are Activision, From Software, Bethesda, and BioWare. We're working with these companies, and I'm going to tell you the title of a game in like one detail, and I want you to tell me what it's from.
Okay.
What company has made this game? All right. We're going to start with, where's the title? I wrote it down. It's not here anymore. All right, great. Echo Knight 2, The Lord of Nightmares.
I know the answer to this one, so I'm gonna let Wyatt say it first.
How do you know this game, Brett?
I listen. I have my ways.
So we have from Software, Bethesda, Ubisoft,
Activision. No Ubisoft.
Oh, no Ubisoft. Yeah. Okay.
Activision, Bethesda, BioWare, and FromSoft.
Oh, BioWare. Okay.
I'm doing studios that we talked about during the episode, aside from Activision. I think
He's
I'm
looking
into
it up.
Ubisoft.
I mean, we did talk about
Look it up. I see his glasses. He's looking it up.
No. I'm writing down the studio names so that I can keep them in my head.
Classic excuse.
I'll share my screen with you just so we can confirm.
I'll give you one detail. It's a first-person adventure game.
Okay. I'm gonna go with From Software. I'm gonna go.
You are correct. This is a From Software game.
Oh snap!
They had a horror franchise going for a little bit.
I do know they had a lot of weird games.
I tried to find a weird one because FromSoft has some crazy stuff like Forever.
Well, that's why
Kingdom.
No, that's why I went with From Software because I know they did a bunch of weird stuff before landing on Dark Souls. So
it makes me wish that they would go back to them at some point because they're just so like off the wall.
Okay, I'm prepared.
You're ready?
I'm ready.
Are you sure, Wyatt?
No, but let's do this.
Can you tell me what studio released MDK2?
MDK?
MDK2.
I'm assuming that stands for something, but that would be too obvious.
I don't think it stands for anything. I'll give you that detail. Sure? I don't think it stands for anything.
It stands for Murder, Death, Kill. Because that sounds familiar.
I don't think it does. There is no text on this cover, aside from MDK2. Then it says outthink, outsnipe, outshoot. All right, Brett. You didn't go first last time, so what's your answer? What company do you think made MDK2?
Words BioWare are appearing in my brain. So I'm gonna go with that.
I'll give you a detail. BioWare is the hardest one to find a game that you guys would not recognize because they primarily release They don't release a ton of games. It's mostly recognizable stuff. Wyatt?
I'm gonna go with Activision.
That's BioWare.
Oh!
BioWare released MDK2. It is a sequel to a 1997 game named MDK that was made by Shiny Entertainment.
I feel like I know that name. Shiny Entertainment. Hold on. Keep going. Actually, yeah. I'm just gonna.
I didn't know they had a sequel to this one. I totally know this game. I know what MDK is.
All right.
That's so weird.
Now, our last game. It's from either Bethesda or Activision. Wayne Gretzky Hockey.
Activision.
That's Bethesda. That is the first game that Bethesda published. Is Wayne Gretzky's Hockey.
You know what I thought you were going to do for Bethesda? They made a Home Alone game for, I think it was the Super Nintendo. And I thought you were going to pull that one out and be like, ooh, who did that?
No, I knew someone would probably know that one. So I tried to go for like the thing that I know we all know the least about, which is obviously hockey. Activision's got some weird games, but they're a little too easy because a lot of their games are just like one word. I could tell you something like they've released like 8 versions of Kaboom. There's nothing to go on there.
Kaboom.
Yep, just Kaboom with an exclamation point. Obviously, you got to have the exclamation point. All right. With that, we've officially hit the end of our episode. You know what time mean do? Shoutouts.
Destroyed at the end of this one. We have uncartographied railgun and what time mean.
Look, this is what happens when we don't do the show for a week, because we all completely fall apart. No one else notices because we still put something out there, but we just pre-recorded it a full week in advance. So
it's like I said last episode or 2 episodes ago. Everything seems fine and dandy on the surface, but then you look behind the scenes and it's the meme of the room on fire, and the guy's just like, "This is fine." That's 001 behind the scenes.
All right. Speaking of a room on fire, I'm going to give my shout out to Masayoshi Soken, the composer for Final Fantasy XIV getting through cancer, because it's bonkers that, first of all, no one else knew aside from like his close friends and the studio. He didn't tell anyone. He wasn't public. He just comes out on stage and is like, "Yeah, so my cancer's in remission." And people are like, "What? You had cancer?" So yeah, like major props to him for writing all the music for the next Final Fantasy XIV expansion while in the hospital.
That's insanity.
Doing cancer treatments, which is just an incredible story, and it's also the kind of thing like I'm very much happy that we're not losing another great composer to cancer, because that happens far too often. And it's great that he's still going to be around. So I am very happy to see that he's doing better. Brother Wyatt, which one of you is ready with your shout out?
I'm ready. I already showed Ryan this, but shout out to the movie Star Chaser: The Legend of Orin, because what a movie.
Oh man. Look it up
This
on
is
YouTube.
It is a mid-80s animated sci-fi movie that is so shamelessly ripping off Star Wars that it's actually kind of hilarious, and the whole thing is simply incredible. It is wonderful. It is some prime 80s sci-fi cheese.
This looks cursed. This looks cursed.
Well, speaking of cursed, Brett, what's your shout out?
Don't say that it's cursed, because I'm gonna shout out Kentaro Miura.
Oh
Don't
no,
say cursed. But yeah, no, we talked about him in the beginning, but I need to really emphasize just how much of an inspiration he is for me personally. Because I have not gotten very far in Berserk, and I haven't read it in a while, but just his like attitude towards like story making is, I think, something that anyone else who makes stories should look into. Just read some interviews with this man, because
they're really interesting.
Yeah, you will come away a smarter person for it. So yeah, there's my shout out.
And yeah, you can't understate the effect that he had, specifically on like the Japanese games industry, but so much of what we kind of associate with a lot of Japanese products and studios like FromSoft is kind of inspired by Berserk and Miura's work. So it's always awful to see that happen. All right. Yeah. On that sad note, it's the end of the episode. That means, Brett, you've put me in the position of having to shill our podcast after that. So
you should have had me go last.
You're the one who called it cursed.
Podcast available Tuesday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern time on the platform of your choice and
God,
YouTube.
I feel uncomfortable.
All right, the outro's playing. You can watch us live on Twitch, generally Sundays at 8 p.m. unless something goes crazy. That's usually the time. So.
And I'd also like to plug, Brian and I are probably going to be live streaming It Takes Two for some of this.
That'll be on the YouTube too. So
okay.
you will see that on the YouTube at some point.